Heineken has seen a tremendous increase in brand value this year, increasing by 16%. A huge congratulations to everyone at Heineken for this achievement. I'm here with James Thompson, Chief Commercial Officer at Heineken. Good to see you, James.
Good to see you. Thanks a lot, Martin.
Sure. So how do you believe that brands add value to businesses?
Well, I suppose for consumers, brands are bundles of benefits, values and associations that are easy to remember. For us, they are bundles of activity which represent economic value. And so ultimately, whether you measure it or report it by country as we do, or region, what's underneath all of that is what's going on in your brand. So it's a financial unit, but it's also a unit for organising activity. And I think the stronger the brand, the more likely you are to have innovation, different commercial activities. So I think it's really it's a summary and a symbol of all the economic activity that goes into an organisation.
Interesting. And what would you say are the most important things to consider when building a strong brand?
I think...
Big question.
Yeah, I know. I feel it's like humble answering it. I think while the tools have changed, the principles really haven't. You've got to have very clearly have your benefits, your role, your purpose, your insights very, very clear. I think a lot of people are making some mistakes in having a big focus on extrinsic benefits, purposes, if you like, causes, without having real clarity around your intrinsic category benefits and rooting your brand in your intrinsic category leadership, as well as what you offer a broader way. I think that's how you do it. And then be consistent. Be brilliant so people like it and remember it, but then just reinforce it consistently over a long period of time at every touch point. And I think that's easily said, but very hard to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we're living through quite turbulent times in the world at the moment.
Yeah.
What do you see as the main headwinds for businesses and brands over the next year or two? And how is Heineken planning to overcome some of those, or all of those, hopefully?
Yeah, well, there are two, I think, that we particularly see. The first is inflation, clearly. And it's not just ingredients or packaging materials. In some cases, it's freight. And it's just so expensive, and media inflation at least double digit as well. So these pressures on costs are resulting in people like us having to be better at pricing, better at revenue management than we've ever been before. There's a whole generation of management that's never really had to do it in this extreme way. So we've got the tools, we've got the science, bringing some of the leadership and processes to it, but it's incredibly challenging, and we're doing our very best on that. I think the other one, particularly for our world, is the impact of what's going on in terms of how people feel about the world, given the wars, given the impact on cost of living, and what's happening with the disease up and down and so on and on. What's happening to socializing? So, for example, in the broader alcohol context, you've seen during COVID things like wine at home go up, beer a little bit down, spirits being made, cocktails being made at home. As we come out of that phase of the pandemic, at least in this part of the world, we're seeing beer on the rise again because people are going out and socializing in that way. Yep. But keeping an eye on what's happening is quite tricky, and we need to be more agile than we've ever been before, and need to change month by month, actually, to what's going on.
Yeah, of course. And you mentioned consumers earlier on. How does Heineken actually make a concerted effort to stay in touch with consumers? What are the strategies that you find work well to stay close to those needs?
Well, some of our companies go out and spend time with consumers every month. I've just come back from our Dublin business where they were just fresh from a consumer connection thing, which they do regularly, the whole company. And they sometimes interview people, they broadcast it to the entire company. So there's a sort of a sense of connecting all the time. We have some foundational research around fundamental needs that people have or wishes that they have. And then we keep it updated with digital ethnography and things like that. So I think we've got our finger quite on the pulse when we add social listening and that sort of thing. So very regularly we do a check on what trends are changing within the fairly constant needs that we've analysed.
Sure. And it's interesting you talk about trends, and it sounds as though you've got lots of things in place to stay in touch with consumers. So with that in mind, what would you say are the largest trends that you've discovered emerging in the last 2 or 3 years? Obviously, it's been a turbulent time, as we said.
Yeah.
But how would you sum that up?
I'd say this kind of the trends are, again, the fundamental needs are pretty similar, but the trends are diversity of flavour, I think lightness of product, and an introduction of well-being considerations into people consuming. And that's across the age ranges, but actually particularly in younger age groups. So people aren't stopping socialising, people aren't stopping consuming alcohol, but they are trying to figure out what the balance is that actually is better for them over time. And you combine that with sort of this explosion of flavours. It's quite challenging actually to keep in touch with it when beer has been beer for quite such a long time. And if you look at the total alcohol market, there's much more blurring between the categories, whether it's cocktails, long drinks, and so on. So I think the competitive set, you have to take a broader frame of mind to it, broader attitude.
Sure. And obviously Heineken is a very big global business. How do you balance localization with globalization from a marketing strategy perspective? How do you tailor your marketing strategy by market, as well as perhaps having a layer of global consistency, if that's the approach that you take?
It's very much the approach we try to take on the Heineken brand. On many of the other brands, we're a little bit more decentralized. I think we always start from the point of view that beer is a very local thing. It's consumed locally. It's often associated with national or regional cultures. It's often associated with people's passion points, which are very local. So we don't try to impose a one-size-fits-all on people, but we do try to have a consistency of positionings and, where possible, frameworks for campaigns. Now, I think on the Heineken brand, actually, the pendulum swings back and forward quite unhelpfully. And for a while, we were, I think, too one-size-fits-all. We had this sort of a slight sort of European glossiness, which I think didn't really suit much of the world. And while we are a somewhat aspirational brand, we were representing it, I think, in too slick a way. So what we started to do is tailor it, and with more local insights, gently. I mean, not letting all the horses out at once, but we've just done some super work in Southeast Asia, which I think is really nice. We're embarking on the same in the United States. Europe's had its own work now, and I think we're within the guidelines. I think we're finding ourselves able to flex for local insight, and our performance is showing this is beginning to work.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you said the word insights there, and it's a word that's used a lot in our industry.
Yes.
Perhaps too much sometimes. So, the key thing is, as I'm sure you know, is to connect those insights within the business. So, if you've uncovered a new and compelling consumer insight, how does Heineken actually action and connect that insight within the business?
I mean, for a start, I think you make a brilliant point, because I think an insight really is only an insight if your competitors don't have it, and if you act on it to do so. Otherwise, it's just information. So I think you make a great point, and by definition, therefore, there aren't that many of them. And you have to keep hunting, and you have to keep validating them, and be curious and ask why. What we do once we've done that is we have learning communities. So we tend to act sort of more by who's doing what's interesting, how can we get together and talk about it together and act together. We do that much more than having boards and forcing things. So we just connect people. And it happens organically. The marketing director in Mexico will get onto the sales director in Brazil, for example, and it's a very nice organic process. Now we have to do a little orchestration and shepherding of it to make sure, but we are increasingly finding that we can scale up knowledge and opportunities that we spot very close to the ground, even in small countries, and connect everybody quickly. That's at least the goal.
Sure. Okay. So it sounds like you have a process in place, and as you say, no doubt some of that happens organically. But just to put you on the spot a little bit, can you give us an example of an insight that actually has been successfully connected and the action the business has taken as a result of that information from consumers?
Yeah, I can. I mean, one example would be in our Mexican business, which is powerhouse for the company. We market over 15 brands there, and we uncovered not all that long ago that 9 of them were competing in the same space.
Wow. Really?
And it's because of a particular methodology we were using to understand kind of what drives demand and so on. And it was not just looking at emotional drivers, it's functional drivers and all sorts of stuff. So basically they've cut their portfolio dramatically, changed their investment profile, changed their innovation goals, changed their sales force calling patterns, changed the outlets they prioritize, everything like that. So almost like business re-engineering based on an insight we covered from the consumer.
That's a really good example.
Yeah. And so, by the way, just the other thing, if you asked us, do we then share? Yeah, 20 other countries around the world are now doing the same piece of work and doing similar things.
Okay, wow, that's real impact. So just thinking about the future now, how do you think the sort of rules, if you like, of brand building will change in the future, and where do you see the opportunities from Heineken's perspective?
I think that I'm sure everyone would say that data is transforming how we do these things, and it almost breaks down the barriers between how you think about consumer and customer, because you can connect the dots, potentially at least, in ways that I think had never been imagined before. And there's a sort of a much more generous underpinning of analytics and data, some of which you can delegate to the machines. And so without that, your ability to do investment that gives you a higher return, trade-off balance between market share, profitability, all of those sort of things, you can do much more. But again, I think it's about tools and not about what brand building is. Sure. The other thing I would keep coming back to is, you asked me about what a brand is, and it's those, for consumers, the emotional connections and bundles of things. This is why creativity is so important. And so many people are rushing to the data side of it. We're doing that too, of course. But if you ignore the fact that you've got to creatively create that emotional spark in this absolute ocean of competition for eyeballs, ears, whatever, at the end of the day, what humans can bring is what creates the magic.
Yeah, it's a fine line.
Yeah.
And we can't talk about brand building at the moment and marketing at the moment without talking about sustainability, increasingly very important for businesses, for brands to consider, as well as the world generally, obviously. Can you talk us briefly through Heineken's sustainability agenda? What are the big challenges that you face as you aim to make the business more sustainable?
It's a great point. I mean, we have a program called Brew a Better World. It's been going for nearly 15 years, and we've just refreshed it a year or so ago as part of our overall new company strategy we call Evergreen. It's difficult. As you're growing, your footprint increases. And things like, for example, packaging, our bottles, we're a premium brand, they tend to be one-way bottles. How do you deal with that? Because we're selling more and more of them all the time. So we're looking into things like circular packaging, so aiming for 80% circularity in 2 or 3 years if we can do that. We're looking into returnable bottles, because you get 10 times or more out of that. So clearly you can do things like that. 3 of our breweries already in Brazil are powered by green energy, which is phenomenal. Our targets on carbon get us to net zero in 2040, which is 10 years before the Paris Climate Agreement. So we're striving incredibly hard, and of course we don't always know how to do it, and it is complicated by the fact we're growing so much. So it's right at the heart of our agenda. I'm incentivized on it. It's part of my comp, and same with all our leadership team. So it's right at the heart of what we do. Right.
And we talk to lots of clients at Kantar. We have lots of conversations around sustainability. And I think what we've uncovered as almost the key means of success is actually making your sustainability agenda meaningful to consumers. So how do you approach that at Heineken, and how do you, or how will you judge success?
We're incredibly cautious about this, right? I think that greenwashing is not just going to have a backlash against it. It's just nauseating as a practice in its own right. It's the wrong thing to do. There are a couple of things. So in Brazil recently, we did let people know about our 3 breweries, which are sustainable energy. We had the highest brand power as a result of that, of any brand in the world at any time. And sales went through the roof, giving us even more green problems. But anyway, so we have let people know when we've acted. We're not going to make sort of huge chest-beating communications around things we haven't yet done. But for us, sustainability means more than ecology. It also means moderation. It also means people aware of alcohol and we're trying to drive responsible consumption over time. And one of the things that we're doing, I think we're pioneering this, to the best of my knowledge, is we're putting QR codes on all of our packaging by the end of next year, which will give consumers access to unedited facts and information about alcohol and health, risks in certain circumstances, whether it's related to driving or underage consumption and so on. It'll have nutritional and ingredient information. It'll be warts and all. And we believe that people need information and then they need to make choices. But we're going to take an absolute stand that people have the information they need.
Sure. Fascinating stuff. James, thanks very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks to you.